How do hackers test the passwords that they've stolen? Like when they have a giant pile of username and password credentials from a recent data breach, how do they see which ones work and which let them into an account that they can compromise? Like, there's no way they do this manually, trying to log in to each and every one, so hackers automate it. They use scripts or tools or utilities that will loop through every single username and password and brute force or spray different accounts with different passwords and see what lets them in. They check each credential with a cred checker tool. So in this video, I wanted to talk about and show you some of the cred checker tools that exist so we have a better understanding of what's out there, what hackers are using, and how they take advantage of leaked credentials. I also want to draw your attention to how some of the tooling has changed. In this cat and mouse game of cybersecurity, there's a lot of back and forth. When hackers are doing something nefarious and then defenders want to put mitigations or blockers around it. Anyway, OpenBullet 2 is one of those examples of a utility or tool that can be used to test credentials. It's a cross-platform automation suite powered by .NET. You can send requests to a target web application, like any online site or website you might be logging into, and it can be used for scraping and parsing data alongside automated penetration testing. Now, they do add the note, the disclaimer, hey, you should only do this on stuff that you own. Performing credential stuffing attacks or distributed denial of service or anything bad against something you don't own is illegal. That's why we say cyber criminals when hackers are doing this the wrong way. And OpenBullet 2 has a pretty well fleshed out wiki and sort of documentation to get it up and running. We can go ahead and install it on Windows with either a web client if we'd like. Gives us a little bit more flexibility to maybe even access this remotely. That just starts a little server and then you can navigate to the admin interface or the panel here in your web browser. So I do have OpenBullet 2 here on my desktop in a little Windows virtual machine. I can go ahead and get this started so we can see that is serving on port 5000. And with that open in a web browser, we can at least see what the interface looks like. OpenBullet 2. Now, from what I understand, you would prepare a certain number of configurations. And they have a neat little hacker thing here where you could actually define and create a whole configuration that will actually run like C# code. So I can get back to configs after that's been created and then modify this where we could actually build out, like add different blocks for solving CAPTCHAs, having logic or conditions, using different functions that you might otherwise use in code, interact with the browser with like Puppeteer, maybe Selenium, utility things here to work with file uploads, clearing cookies, lots of neat things here, or just making some simple requests. And you can just drag these in and then make any changes and then completely like drag and drop a workflow. All that you could start as a job to brute force, scan, automate scraping, parsing website content, or like automated penetration testing work and brute forcing these passwords. There is a ton of flexibility here. If we were to create a job, you could choose whether that has a file associated with it, word list, range, or combinations that you're working through here, and everything with support for proxies. Proxies are the key component that we'll have to talk about quite a bit here. Because when you log into a website, naturally, really, with good intentions as you, that's you operating out of your identity with your devices, your computer, wherever you are in the world, your location, your region, coming from a usual IP address. But if a bad actor is trying to impersonate you and steal your account and your identity, well, they'll usually want to match all of those little breadcrumbs and artifacts that make you, you, or your online digital footprint, identity, devices, connection, etc. So that's why info stealer malware logs are always trying to profile your computer specs, your general location, so they could use a proxy or a VPN to connect in as that with those details. So when you're using an online account that should really be kept secure, like maybe your Microsoft account or your online cloud identity, those sites and services should be looking into all of those indicators to help triangulate you are who you say you are. But bad actors that try to impersonate you might be using anonymous browsers to try and look like you, or while they're brute forcing and spamming these resources and login pages to try and check their credentials, if they work, well, they'll probably have to even navigate around different IP addresses so they don't get blocked by that online provider. So another really well-known tool called MSOL Spray, put together by Daft Hack or Bo Bullock, genius in Microsoft 365 Entra and ID work. MSOL Spray is a password spraying tool for these Microsoft online accounts. Think like Azure, Office 365, or now Entra, as it's called. But if we take a look at this repository here, they note it's totally possible to lock out accounts as you are hammering maybe one individual username or email address with multiple passwords. So you'll want to spray, like test one password against every single username and not be locking out the accounts, but just slowly, more not to say stealthily, testing passwords. And there are a handful of these, but for a long while, this has been out for maybe 5 years now, MSOL would do the trick. And it still does. But there is a note here. And a big shout out brought to you by Black Hills Information Security. I believe that's where Bo is at for his day job. This tool works well with Fireprox to rotate source IP addresses on authentication requests. That means that if you are spraying passwords, trying one thing after the next, you're actually moving across the internet in a different IP address to make it look like you're coming from a different location every time. That circumvents a lot of rate limiting or being blocked by Azure Smart Lockout. We'll talk a little bit more about Fireprox and that rotating IP address idea in just a little bit, but I did want to show you another tool, Entra Spray, password spraying tool for Microsoft online accounts. A little bit more modern, put together just last year, but it really is honestly, genuinely, just a rewrite of MSOL Spray in Python. MSOL Spray was in PowerShell, so if you're on Linux, maybe in Kali or whatever, maybe just as easy to get this going. And I'm sorry, I keep harping on the Microsoft accounts, like the Azure Active Directory, the Online Identity, and Entra ID, just because that's so real. We've seen it even this year, all throughout. There are password spraying attempts on these online Entra ID tenants. And whenever credentials are leaked in a data breach, well then those threat actors, cyber criminals, and hackers are going to be spraying and testing those creds immediately. Actually, question for you. Do you manage an Entra ID environment for corporate identities and different users? Well, I should know better. You probably are using an Entra ID account for work, and I have a cloud tenant myself. This is one of the old dev testing tenants or online environments to be able to explore Microsoft 365, Azure, and now Entra ID. These are just some of the sample users that are included to mimic a real Entra ID environment. But I gotta show you this super cool new feature set from Flare. It's Identity Exposure Management. So with Entra ID and all the different users that you have, now you can hook them up to Flare so that they are automatically remediated when any of their credentials are leaked out on the dark web. Since Flare is always collecting and tracking information on the darknet as well as the clearnet in shady Telegram channels, chat groups where InfoStealer malware logs are shared, cybercrime forums, bulletin boards, leak sites, all of this, now there's a new integration where you can connect your Entra ID environment, your whole identity provider, so now all of your users could automatically raise an alert whenever their identity or their online accounts are compromised. So now whenever, if Alex or Diego or whoever or whatever user has their password public, leaked in a data breach or whatever, like Saturday at 2 in the morning, well, you don't get into the office to test and check those credentials and passwords until maybe Monday morning, but now the instant that that's leaked, that account in Entra ID can be marked as compromised, automatically suspended and locked, or all the session tokens, active logged in connections and sessions revoked. It is super easy to set up. You just click the Add Integration button in the integrations page, and then you'll be able to fill out all the details necessary for an Entra app that you configure and set up inside your tenant. And look at this. You can automatically create identities and identifiers for each of the accounts. You can even drill that down, filter on a specific group ID, and then you can enable certain kind of features like manually disabling an account, marking one as compromised, or revoking sessions, or automatically doing this, which is highly recommended because the breaches occur when you are not tracking. This is the coolest set and forget identity protection we've got. So let me show you. If I hop over to the identifier section, you can see with this new Entra ID integration, it's automatically created this corporate identities group where I could see all of those Entra ID users. So I can take a look at Adele here, just as one example. And look, you can see other attributes that might be added for that identity. You could, of course, configure alerts, but this identity profile tab is awesome because you can see how it's synced to Entra ID, and it's a consolidated place to see where their passwords or exposed PII or info that's caught in Stealer logs might be present. So they have some passwords that have been compromised. Okay. PII here. Yep, looks like info was included in previous breaches or combo lists that were out and about, and we could actually go validate this. How was Diego doing? I remember he was one example here. Looks like, okay, password stolen as well. Summer 2024, great. But take a look at this IDP credential status column. Not validated. So with this new identity exposure management and Entra ID integration, whenever there's a password that is actively leaked, you could have Flare automatically test to see, are these credentials valid? Do they really genuinely log in that user? And is this an immediate threat and risk? So let me hop over to the credentials browser, and it looks like a lot of the users and accounts in my tenant have had past password compromises, and you could mark these as remediated, so it won't show this again, or ignore it. If we click in to Adele here, we could see the event, maybe learn a little bit as to what breach had this password and other info uncovered, and then we could validate the credential here. I can click this, and it looks like they were exposed passwords, but Adele has since changed her password. That was us simply manually testing the credential, but the real power is when this all happens automatically. So let me get back to our Entra ID user list, and I want to introduce you to Megan. Megan Bowen is our Digital Initiative Public Relations Mark 8 project team retail person. Now, I got an alert from Flare letting me know that Megan had her info exposed in an info stealer malware log. It included 21 different credentials, and we could click to view the event, but I do want to show you this blast radius. Now, this is a super cool visual way to see a compromised account and identity based off of however many info stealer malware logs, what credentials might have been leaked for their different accounts. HubSpot, DocuSign, Box, Amazon, Zoom. This includes all of the other leaks, all the cookies, of course their Entra ID account in here. I think that's pretty stinking cool to be able to see the blast radius. Looking at the event, it looks like Megan fell victim to the Llama C2 info stealer malware, and that was able to pull down a lot of info on her device, including cookies, passwords, and everything else. Looking at this in the credentials browser, I can see that Flare has already validated those credentials and automatically mitigated against further potential identity compromise here by locking down that account. This happened in the moment, so I could literally just Control-Shift-R, refresh to see Entra ID now, and Megan Bowen is no longer going to be able to log in. You could, of course, do this manually to revoke sessions, disable account, or mark as compromised, but Flare was doing the hard work for you. The instant that those credentials were leaked out to the dark web or the public internet. I, for one, think this new identity exposure management feature and functionality and this Entra ID integration with Flare is super cool. You do get the active real-time protection from identity exposure out and about on the dark web for all of your tenant users and team members in the cloud identity provider that you already use. Super cool. But hey, you can play with it, you can kick the tires, see for yourself, get started with the free trial, link below in the video description. Huge thanks to Flare for sponsoring this video. Back to that recent case study, though, of like 80,000 different online Entra ID Microsoft accounts that are being targeted with a cred checker tool, or at least a utility that still has the potential to test, validate, and see if these creds will get into a compromised account. Another one I wanted to bring to your attention is Team Filtration. Team Filtration is a cross-platform framework for enumerating, spraying, exfiltrating, and backdooring Office 365, Azure Active Directory, or Entra ID accounts. And Team Filtration is put together by a good friend of mine, Flangvik. Big shout out to Melvin. We have a video together where we collabed at DEF CON, and I have not gotten it out the door, and I feel awful, and I'm so sorry. But Team Filtration is super slick. This is, again, another utility that's been developed for the good reasons of penetration testing, valid security testing, to find flaws and weaknesses as the good guys before the bad guys do, and emulate the adversaries that we are up against. Now, Team Filtration does a similar sort of thing where it could operate with a username or password or tokens or cookies for an online identity and then exfiltrate some of the stuff that's included in Microsoft Teams or OneDrive or SharePoint or any of the stuff that's all included with that identity provider here. The Office 365 suite, email, Outlook, all of this. But the spraying module is more pertinent to our conversations here, where you could include the passwords that'll try to beat up. It could spray credentials against accounts, it could enumerate information against the tenant, backdoor, lot of stuff here, and shout out to the folks that helped put together that utility. But here's the thing. Remember I was mentioning that cat and mouse game in cybersecurity and kind of the restrictions of password spraying as, putting our hacker hat on, and even identifying, triangulating, and detecting a real, genuine, legitimate login from a potential online account. Remember we had to talk about proxies. We had to talk about rotating your IP address because while Team Filtration was awesome, cool, and amazing, public suite stuff to be able to test these environments and validate our security posture, but it relied on Fireprox. And while we alluded to Fireprox previously, it's on AWS or Amazon Web Services. Fireprox is an AWS API gateway management tool for creating on-the-fly HTTP pass-through proxies for unique IP rotation. Clever way to be able to manipulate and modify your source IP address or looking like where you're coming from when you make connections across the internet. The way that the security industry got around that, and everyone in the scene, for better or for worse, right, is leveraging some of the cloud hosting providers like AWS. Now, there are a lot of other options. Big shout out again, Black Hills Information Security, always doing incredible stuff. But relying on AWS or some of these cloud hosting providers means that you're really up to the acceptable use in terms of that service. And it's totally fair, maybe a little bit, wondering, scratching your head, eyebrow raised, questionable to rotate IP address to spam packets. So AWS made this more explicitly clear on their policy against penetration testing. Very recently, September 30th, the Team Filtration creator Flangvik is saying, look, AWS not only made changes to their terms of service, but now this time they are actively enforcing them. So some of those clever tricks to use Fireprox and by extension the work that Team Filtration would offer since it relies on that capability isn't really feasible right now. At least the from a distance remote enumeration and spraying techniques. Smart cybersecurity community, though, is tracking this. You've got some of the red team professionals, a little bit more of the offensive security specialists, adversary emulation folks, chatting about it, thinking about, well, look, no, there are other alternatives, right? It doesn't need to rely on AWS. Unfortunate that the current implementation of Team Filtration does rely on Fireprox, but there are alternatives, and someone shared a couple here. One mention is IP Spinner, another is OmniProx. Now, I've been looking at OmniProx. This is IP rotation from different providers like Fireprox, but for GCP, Azure, Alibaba, and Cloudflare. Zephyrfish or Andy Gill has a cool blog post about this, again, very recent, so I'll link this in the video description for you. Discusses the exact same problem of Fireprox and Credmaster now kind of being hunkered down on with the AWS change in policy. With the death of Fireprox, folks are looking for something new. So over in my Kali Linux virtual machine, I can go ahead and open up a terminal. I do have OmniProx installed and available here for us. We could see what it could do, quick multi-cloud proxy manager, and with support for Cloudflare and some of these, we could actually use -- setup, and that will kind of walk us through getting this all going. Now, we do already have a profile set up because I've walked through this a little bit. Should be able to create some Cloudflare workers for us while it might otherwise use Azure, Google, GCP, or Alibaba. We should just be able to use Omni Create and then a URL that we want to be able to go to just as an example. Maybe as a little test, we could go to a webhook site to be able to capture the request as it comes through. So let me just have one example here. And then let's try to create some proxies with this utility going to that address. We can use the Cloudflare ones that I have set up, and that will spin up some options here for us. Should give us all the commands that we might be able to run to access this. I know this looks a little overwhelming, but you'll see the Cloudflare worker URL, and then following that, the actual site that we want to go to or navigate to via the proxy. So just as a test, fingers crossed, I can curl this. Let me go ahead and try one of those examples. Ooh. This URL has no default content configured. We could change the response in webhook.site, but it looks like it made through. So if I get back to Firefox, yeah, okay. We can see that came from 162.158.63.46 with all of the Cloudflare sort of headers that kind of do tell us this is coming from that Cloudflare worker. If I do that again, will I get a different IP address or a couple more times? There's another different IP address. Let me add the note that Omniprox does state the Cloudflare option is not with a true IP rotation. They're using different headers to be able to actually specify, look, for a connection, look like we're coming from this location. They also discuss this here in a little bit of their setup. You can see some of the Azure containers that they create as an example alongside the Cloudflare ones, but they do note that is headers only for Cloudflare. Another tool that was suggested as an alternative to Firefox for doing some of that potential password spraying, or at least IP rotation to different connections here. IP Spinner was another one that was included, so again, we'll leave links in the video description for you to explore and play with that if you would like. I will say IP Spinner is neat though, because alongside Azure and some of the other options for like cloud hosting providers to be used for this IP address rotation, they also offer one feature for GitHub Actions, which is kind of neat. But I thought, for at least some demo, as you know I like to make sure I have those in videos, actually be on keyboard and do something, why not try to mask our IP address for some, brute forcing password spraying options with Tor? Now, let me say, obviously that would be very slow, but it could still work and we'll have a different IP address every time. So Entra ID and beating up these Microsoft accounts won't get too mad at us and block the IP address we connect from. One of our previous options for password spraying was EntraSpray, and that was a simple and easy Python script as a quick and easy rewrite of MSOL spray, and it has a little argument and parameter that we could provide for a proxy for us to send traffic through. We could do that with Tor. Maybe that helps puts a little dark web cybercrime spin on this whole thing, but I want to go download the Tor Expert bundle. That way I can run the service and connect to the network, and I'll just be doing that on Linux since I know the EntraSpray Python script will work easy in Python on Linux. So I've got Tor downloaded in an opt Tor directory that I extracted into another Tor directory that included a folder with the other Tor binary in it. So it looks really funny, opt Tor, Tor, Tor. But this will get us connected to Tor. And now in another terminal, let me open up down here. I did download EntraSpray from that GitHub repository. So let me move into that directory and we could simply run our EntraSpray script. Now this requires a proxy that we'll of course provide from our Tor listener. We know that is on localhost 9050, and we need to provide a user list and a password to spray against those users. So I also have a user list of the users that are just in my Entra ID tenant, the Azure Active Directory and Microsoft Online accounts here, and say that they were included in some leak. Forgive me, I know we're doing a little bit of movie magic here, but we could use our EntraSpray cred checker with the user list that we have in our current directory, a password that say, oh, we just found in one of these leak dumps or info stealer malware logs. We're testing anything that we might see, and let's include the proxy with the SOX5 for Tor on 127.0.0.1 and 9050. I'm hoping this will work. Spraying across 16 total users. Logging output. We are working over Tor, so we'll see if this gets a hit. For our movie magic, I did make sure that one of the users has that leaked password, and there it is. There's Miriam G. They still need to register with MFA. But now that we know her password, could we log in as her? Login.microsoft.com, acting as the adversary, putting my hacker hat on here. Will we get into Miriam's account, since now we've been able to test and check her credentials that were stolen, leaked, available some way, somehow. Yeah, let's set up Microsoft Authenticator and enroll in our own two-factor authentication. All right, so look, that I know was a little bit of a safari ride, going a little all over the map, exploring different tools, seeing what exists, what's out there, and how it's changed over time with the security cat and mouse game of, yeah, maybe some some security questionable things of rotating IP addresses to potentially do offensive security or brute force and spray passwords. But it's real, and that's what's actually happening in the real world, and so many different corporate online IDs, different accounts and identities, business email compromise, session hijacking, account takeover, that stuff happens all too often. And it's what opens the door for ransomware and even more malware in the environment. So I hope you learned a thing or two. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do all those YouTube algorithm things like comment, subscribe, and please, pretty please, do give some love to our sponsors. Really, genuinely, I think this Flare identity exposure management platform and the Entra ID integration is so cool because I know you've got an Entra ID environment. We all do. You can help protect your users, protect your people, protect your security posture with some of the sweet stuff they're cooking now. Link below in the video description. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next video.